the webinar for you today. So I'll go ahead and introduce the speaker this afternoon. So our speaker this afternoon is Dr. J.C. Chong. And Dr. Chong is a professor and extension specialist of turf and ornamentals and entomology at Clemson University.
Anybody else here?
JC joined Clemson University in 2007 after completing master's and PhD training at the University of Georgia and postdoctoral training at the University of Florida. His current research and extension program focuses on developing practical and effective pest management tools and approaches for turf grass and ornamentals. So the topic or the title of his talk this afternoon is Developing a Pesticide Rotation Program for Bedding Plants in Greenhouses. So welcome, Dr. Chong, and I'll ask you to share your screen and start the webinar.
What's that? Oh, can you hit that when you go down?
All right, thank you, Jeffrey. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm J.C. Chong from Clemson University, as you can see on the screen there. And that's my email address. So if you have any questions about pest management in greenhouses or nurseries, feel free to contact me if you wish. Even though most of my training are done in the southern US, but my program actually have more of a national reach in some way. So if in the future, if you feel like talking to me, go ahead and email me. That's probably the best way to get hold of me. So today we're going to talk about the pesticide rotation. And when we talk about pesticide rotation, of course, we are talking about pesticide resistance. I hope that most people agree with me that pesticide resistance is actually real. It's not a myth, really. And I have come across several cases of pesticide resistance in the past. And this is one example that I've come across several years ago, dealing with one of the grower in South Carolina. And they were growing hydrangea, basically, and they have a serious spider mite problem. So they call me in and say, hey, can you help me? And then we basically say, you might want to consider resistance. That's because according to their headquarters, they were giving instructions to spray avid and avid only. So they've been using avid in the same crop for quite a few years. And I was saying, maybe there's some resistant problem happening. So I got some of their plants. I take it back to my greenhouse and I spray different kind of insecticide on it. And this is a result. The graph basically showed the result that I got. So the blue bars are basically the number of mites before I spray, and the red bars are the number of mites that were still there after I spray. So as you can see, if I spray water on them, nothing really happened. The before and after number are basically the same. And avid, what I'm seeing is that, well, yeah, sure, but it is reduced, but it is not reduced as much as I would expect. And if I look at data from all the other miticide, for example, pylon or sultan or sabat and phoromite, all of these really keep the mite population down quite a bit. So based on this kind of data, I can basically suggest that, resistance may be a problem. So what I did is basically recommend to the grower and say, hey, you might want to change to a different kind of miticide. I understand your headquarters is telling you to use avid only. Please convince them that you need to use something else because you have a resistant problem. And which they did. They switched to a different miticide, and the problem basically solved. So miticide resistance or insecticide resistance, for the most part, is actually real. It happened a lot. And the reason why it happened is that, well, we are dealing with a organism. For organism, the one primary thing they were thinking about is to survive, is to pass on their genes. So they'll do whatever they can to pass on their genes. And yes, if you challenge them with something that will kill them, they will find a way around it. So pesticide resistance is basically the result of us using the same kind of chemical over and over and over again. And this, you know, if you sit through any pesticide resistant talk, you've probably seen this graphic before, but I think it's a great graphic. So pesticide resistance, one of the conditions that would favor the development of pesticide resistance is us using the same mode of action or the same insecticide over and over and over again. What happened is that resistant genes always happen through mutation. Oftentimes, in this graph, the little red beetles are the ones that carry those resistant genes. So if you spray the first time, you killed off a lot of these susceptible individuals, which are the white beetles, and then you left only with the resistant beetles to lay eggs. And then the next generation, you're going to have more of this resistant population. So if you keep doing that over and over and over again, the proportion of your resistant population, resistant individual in your population basically grow and grow and grow and grow over time. And ultimately or eventually, you're going to have populations that you cannot kill with the same pesticide again. So that's how typically resistance actually arise. So repeated use of the same mode of action or same insecticide is one of the main conditions how pesticide resistance actually develop. The second condition that would favor pesticide resistant development is limited migration, or in our condition is greenhouses. Think about it, which is that if you do not have a population, individuals coming from somewhere else that doesn't carry that resistant genes to intermingle with your population and dilute the level of resistance, you're going to have that continuing buildup of resistance, right? So in an enclosed space, for example, a greenhouse, the resistant genes will have a condition to continue to stay around, and then they become more and more widespread and permanent. And so, as I say, in the greenhouses, the pests that we deal with, insects and mites, typically come in either through invasion or through introduction. So the population that has already established in your greenhouse and you keep spraying them with the same thing, the chance of them developing resistance is actually pretty high. Now, I mentioned invasion. Invasion is basically a double-edged sword in some way. In some way, invasion coming in from the outside can bring in susceptible genes and therefore dilute the level of resistance. On the other hand, resistant invasion can also bring in resistant genes. What I'm saying is that, as you understand, in a lot of our operations, we are surrounded by other croplands. We are not an island to ourselves. So whatever our neighbors actually do can have a lot of impact on what we actually do within our operation. So this is one of the nursery that I work with in Florida. They are surrounded by crop field, and they are surrounded on the other side by a residential area. And the residential area, they have a lot of people growing citrus, basically backyard citrus. And in the field, they also grow a lot of crops. And in this case, both sides are using a lot of insecticide to control thrips. And they don't change our rotation very much. And therefore, these neighbors basically created a resistant population. So when the wind picks those thrips up and bring it into the nursery, and the nursery suddenly realize, whoa, they can't control the thrips anymore because all these resistant thrips actually come from somewhere else. Now, so therefore, you kind of need to understand that invasion can also bring in resistant genes. So you need to know that what your neighbors are actually doing as far as that pest management is concerned. So have good relationship with your neighbors goes a long way, really, to try to help you figure out exactly what is going on, and you can develop some kind of solution to that. So the third condition that can favor pesticide resistant development is short duration of development. So what it means is that if you have a pest that have short developmental time, that means they have more generations per year. Every time there is a generation, there's some kind of mutation. The chance of developing that mutation to have that resistance is higher. So if you have more generation, it means you have more mutation. If you have more mutations, it means you have a greater risk of pesticide resistance. And therefore, oftentimes what we are seeing is that the pests that have a short duration of development usually have a higher chance of developing pesticide resistance. So if you combine condition 1 and 2 and 3 together, you basically have a perfect condition for resistance. So this is one of the collection of data in some way that show you the generation time and the number of generations of different pests. And as you can see, green peach aphids, 2 spider mites, sweet potato whiteflies, and western flower thrips, they have very short duration of development. Basically, their generation time is anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, meaning that they have multiple generations a year. And guess what? These are also the pest species that have the highest number of active ingredients that they are resistant to, simply because they have more time, more chance to actually develop that. And because they are a major pest, a lot of growers are using very handed approach and try to control them, keep spraying and spraying and spraying. And then we have more resistant problem with these pest species. And let's look at vine mealybugs, somewhere in the middle. And their generation time is about 1 month. And they have, even though they have multiple generations a year, just by that longer development, longer generation time, the risk of them developing resistance actually reduce. If you are talking about something that even have even longer generation time, for example, ambrosia beetle and Japanese beetles, the number of cases where resistance are reported are even lower. So, the chance of developing resistance really depends on how many generations you have, how long of the duration of the development, and how heavy-handed or how frequently you actually use insecticide to try to control them. So if you have those 3 combined, you have a big problem. All right, so everybody talk about pesticide resistance, but not everybody understand pesticide resistance. So what happened oftentimes is people have misconception or even myth about pesticide resistance. So I want to bring up a few of them, just sort of rebunk them in some way. All right, so one of the most common thing I heard about when I talk to growers or talk about pesticide resistance is that, well, all right, so I used to use this before, it works great, and now it doesn't work. So it must be resistant, right? Well, unfortunately, not always. Now, a product that's failing or have poor efficacy, it doesn't always mean that the pest population has developed resistance to it. It could be a lot of other things that could happen that cause the poor efficacy. It could be that you are misidentifying the pest, or you use the wrong thing, or you apply at the wrong time, or you haven't done a very good job in achieve complete coverage, or that your pesticide has been storing around for too long and it's really not working that great. So there's a lot of reasons why it could happen. And oftentimes, like I say, pest identification is very, very important in this case, because if you see a distorted terminal on your geranium, it doesn't always mean broad mite. It could be some other issues. So you need to first identify what is causing that problem and find the right solution for it. So really the first step in pesticide resistant management is to figure out what is the problem. If you can find out what is causing the problem, then you can choose the right ingredient. You can choose the right application rate, and you can use a right application timing. A lot of problem will be solved. So let's do proper pest identification first. The second myth that I often heard about or misunderstanding that people have is that if a resistance is reported somewhere, it's everywhere. And that is not true, because resistance oftentimes is a local phenomenon. All right. So the resistance of, for example, thrips to spinosyn in Palm Beach County, Florida, doesn't really mean that you're going to have a problem in Waterbury. Not always, simply because what is happening in Palm Beach County may not end up spreading to where you are. But understand that our industry actually involves a lot of shipping of plants, interstate shipping of plants. So there is still a chance for those resistance to spread. So, but I understand that most of the time, pesticide resistance is a local phenomenon. And the third myth about resistance is that a lot of people think resistance is inevitable, so we might as well just give up. Well, that's actually not true. There's a lot of things that we can actually do about avoiding or delaying pesticide resistance development. And that's if everybody believes that pesticide resistance is inevitable, and if it is inevitable, then why in the world am I saying, sitting here and talking about it? So the whole point of this talk really is what we can do to really limit or avoid the development of resistance. So those hopefully at the end of this talk, if you don't get anything at all, you'll be able to pick up some tips as far as what you can do and to try to avoid this particular problem. All right. So here are some of the recommendations that I have as far as avoiding pesticide resistance. You have heard of this over and over again in the past. The most important thing about avoiding pesticide resistance is practice IPM. IPM, everybody heard about it, but it is not just using different kind of control method. The whole goal of IPM really is to reduce the use of insecticide and miticide or pesticide in general. So if you practice IPM and really consider using biological control, you can really avoid using insecticide in some way. So I would recommend that if you're really serious about pesticide resistance, practice IPM would be the first thing, and really consider biological control. Why I mention biological control is that biological control is based on ecology. It's based on something eating something or something infecting something. And that kind of interaction usually is so tight that the pest usually cannot develop resistance to those kind of interaction or kill. So if you use a predatory mites to kill spider mites, the spider mite are not going to have a whole lot of way to try to get away from biological control. So if you can practice biological control effectively, you can reduce the amount of pesticide or the frequency you need to spray. And therefore, you can actually avoid pesticide resistance. The second thing is, well, tied in with IPM is only spray when you need to. In that way, again, you're not spraying when it's unnecessary. First of all, it saves you money. And second, and just avoid some an unnecessary use and unnecessary exposure of pest to pesticide. Right. So that's one thing to do. And the third thing I would say is to achieve excellent spray coverage. What I mean is that not only are you increasing your efficacy to increase your spray coverage, you are basically reducing the chance of the pest getting in contact with sublethal dose of the residue. What I mean by sublethal is that when they get in contact with those residue, the pests do not die. If they do not die, they have a chance to develop that mutation. If they have a chance to develop that new mutation, that means they have the chance to develop pesticide resistance, right? So if you can achieve excellent coverage, reduce the pest population as much as you can, then you can avoid a lot of things. And another thing would be rotate your pesticide. And that's one thing that I would recommend. And that's one thing that we're going to focus today. So I'm going to save that for a little bit later. And the last thing is, kind of like my pet peeve in some way is try to avoid tank mixers. But tank mixers do have their efficacy, do have their use when it is sensible. What I think when tank mix is sensible is if you're using two different products, if you're mixing two different products to control two different pest species, that makes sense. I mean, not every insecticide actually are created equal. So you may have to use different things for different pests that you have at the same time. Tank mix makes a lot of sense in that case. Second is if you are using tank mix of two different products or more to try to control different life stages. That makes sense to me as well, because a lot of insecticide, especially miticide, are not equally effective for a lot of different life stages. For example, if you have a mixed population and you only have two products, one of them is good for adult, the other one is good for eggs, maybe you can mix them together and to achieve a broader coverage of all your life stage. So in that case, again, tank mix makes sense to me. Well, we'll talk about all these in a little bit more details later on. Right. So let's focus on pesticide rotation. Right. Among pesticide rotation, I also have some recommendation as far as what you could do to really develop a good pesticide rotation program. The first thing is to think about mode of action. So mode of action is basically, it's a big word that basically say how an insecticide or miticide kill an insect or a mite. Basically, it's that biochemical process, how they actually achieve that kill. That's mode of action. So one of the things that I recommend for pesticide rotation is to rotate your products based on different mode of action. All right, not different brand name, not different brand name or different numbers or anything like that. You want to change among different modes of action. The second recommendation that I would make is that in your rotation program, you want to mix in a physical mode of action, such as oil or soap. What I mean by physical mode of actions are basically those pesticides that would kill a pest, not through biochemical process, but more through things like suffocations or dehydrations or something that the pest cannot develop a resistance to. And among insecticide and miticide, horticultural oil and soap and biological control or biopesticide actually fits that classification. The third thing I would mention about rotation is you want to start your rotation program with the most effective product and the most effective application rate. We'll talk about it in a bit. The last thing, another thing would be that if you are drenching, you do not want to follow with a spray of the same mode of action. So there's quite a few recommendations I have here, but what I'll do later on really is, go through each one of them and provide you with some example as far as how to do it and what I mean by how to do it. All right, so let's talk about mode of action first. Earlier, I mentioned that mode of action is basically how a pesticide actually kills the pest. Generally, mode of action, we have actually 34 different mode of action now classified by IRAC. IRAC is the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee. It's basically a group of scientists that gets together and look at each one of those products and try to assign them to different mode of action and provide recommendation as far as how to develop a pesticide rotation program. So far, we have 34 known classes of 34 known mode of action classified by IRAC. But generally, they can be fallen into 5 groups. The first group would be that these are the chemicals that would influence the nervous system. So they would poison the nerve and muscles, and make the insect sort of paralyzed or twitching uncontrollably. Eventually, they die. The second groups are so-called growth regulators. These are the pesticides that actually do something to the biochemical process that control molding and growth and development and things like that, or reproduction. And so the insects would either fail to complete development or stop laying eggs, or something weird is going to happen to them. And then eventually they die. And the third group are what we call the respiration or energy production inhibitors. These are the chemicals that go deep into the insects, get to the mitochondria to stop those biochemical processes that create energy. So basically, the insects will run out of juice, run out of energy, eventually they die. And the fourth group are what is called midgut or stomach actors. That's really just one mode of action, which is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. So what they do is basically mess up the gut of the insects. Cause a lot of holes, makes a lot of lesions, cause a lot of bleeding and all that, and then eventually they die. And the last group stuff that we don't know how exactly they work. So these are the unknown or non-specific mode of action, and until the exact mode of action they are identified, a lot of insecticide or miticide are actually in this group, and then until, like I say, until they identify what mode of action they are, and they're assigned to the proper group. Otherwise, they're going to sit there for a little bit. All right. So there are a lot of modes of action out there. And if you want to really know more about how they work, how they were developed, what it means, you can look at this particular document. This is called the insecticide and miticide mode of action field guide, put together by myself, Bill Klingman, and Frank Hale at the University of Tennessee. And the link is in this slide if you want that. And you can just click on that. It is a huge document. All right. So like I said, it goes through the history of that mode of action, how they actually works, what kind of products are in there, and things like that. So in case tonight you cannot fall asleep, this is a great document to help you sleep. Just read through that within time, no time, you just fall asleep, no problem. Trust me. Anyway, if you want to know more about mode of action, this is one document that you should get. All right. So, you can go to that document to find out what mode of action one particular pesticide is on, or you can just look at the label. If you are looking at some of the new label for insecticide, miticide, or fungicide, or even herbicide, all kinds of pesticide, usually the mode of action group number is on the label. So this is a label for Altus, a little bit older label, but I'm just using that as an example. So on the label, you see the trade name. Trade name is Altus, big, broad name so that you can recognize it. Trade name, Altus. And down here in a smaller print is the active ingredient or the chemical name of the insecticide down there. And up there in the corner, you see a box that say group 4D insecticide. That is the mode of action group number. Okay, so that's where you're going to look. In the front page of all your labels, on the corner, right-hand corner, that's where that mode of action number is going to be at. So in this case, Altus have a mode of action of 4D. Each one of these has a meaning to it. Number 4 means the mode of action. So each one of the insecticide or miticide or fungicide, whatever, are given a mode of action number. And in this case, 4 means the mode of action of Altus is nicotinic acetylcholine receptor competitive modulators. I mean, listen to this. I'm supposed to be the professional. It takes me a while to actually pronounce all their names. And there's no way I can remember it all. So the good people at Iraq basically give it a number 4. Everybody can remember number 4, I hope. So make it easy to remember or understand what it is. So number 4 is the mode of action. D indicates the chemical class. Within the mode of action, they're subdivided into several individual chemical class. And in this case, the chemical class of Altus is butanolides. Right, it's right there. So on the label, you'll be given information about the mode of action number and also the chemical class letter. Right. Some of the products are combination product, right? In this case, Pladia. Pladia is a combination of cyclonilipole and fronicamide. Pladia is an insecticide used for a lot of different sucking insects, for sure. And it is a combination product. So the mode of action of Pladia has 2 numbers. 28, which is cyclonilipole, and 29, which is fronicamide. So again, even if it's a combination product, you're going to have 2 numbers on there. So again, these are the recommendations that I give about pesticide rotation. And what I'll do next is basically going through each one of these recommendations and provide some example by what I actually mean so that you can actually understand them based on example that I give. All right, so the first thing is rotate among different IRAC number or the mode of action, not the IRAC letter or the chemical class or the trait names, okay? So we always call this follow the number game. If you can remember the number, that's great. All right, so let's look at this particular rotation program. Let's just say grower A decided to develop a rotation program. And he decided to use Altus followed by mainspring, followed by Altus, followed by Rycar. So my question is this a proper rotation program? I'll give you 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. The answer is no, it is not a proper rotation program. Why? Because within the product, within the rotation, he has Altus showed up twice. Now, Altus is the same product. And remember what I say about the rotating? You want to rotate among different IRAC number or the mode of action. So within the program, you don't want to have product using the same number. All right, so Altus is 4, another Altus is also 4. So that's not a proper rotation program. All right, what about this? Another grower decided to develop a rotation program that is acetamiprid, pyriproxyfen, and followed by abamectin. Okay, I give you guys a little bit of time to think about it. While you guys are thinking, let me mention something, which is that a lot of folks ask me, well, you know, if I develop a rotation program, how many products do I want to put in there? I mean, in the previous example, I give you 4. Here, I give you 3. How many should you have? Is there a magic number? The answer is, well, there's not really a magic number. I would recommend at least 3, because if you have only 2 products going back and forth, that's not really much of a rotation, right? So you need to have at least 3. If you can have 4, even better. If you can do 5 or 6, well, yeah, sure, why not? If you have all that products to use, absolutely, go for it. So whatever it is, I think 3 is a minimum number. But really though, between you and me, as long as you rotate your insecticide, I'll be okay with that. I don't care how many you rotate, but as long as you rotate at least 3, we are friends. Okay, so rotate. Anyway, go back to this example. Acetamiprid followed by pyriproxyfen, followed by abamectin. Is this a good rotation program? Well, the answer is yes, it is. Acetamiprid or Tristar is 4A, number 4. Pyriproxyfen or distance is 7C, number 7. Abamectin or avid is number 6. So you're rotating from 4 to 7 to 6. Different numbers, different mode of action. That's good. Very good. All right, what about this particular rotation program? You have acetamiprid followed by flupyridifluron, followed by spiromethafen. This is not a good rotation program. Remember what I say, that you need to rotate different numbers, not different class. Even though acetamiprid, which is 4A, and flupyridifluron, which is 4D, have different class number, different class letter. One is A and one is D, but they have the same number, which is 4. In that case, they are still the same mode of action. So you don't want to rotate them or include them in the same mode, in the same rotation program. So this is not a proper rotation program. What about this one? You have Tristar, Altus, followed by Savat. The answer is no. In fact, they are the same rotation program as previously, only that this time I'm using trade names. So even though the trade names of different products can be very different, what you really need to look at is the active ingredients or the mode of action of the active ingredient, not the trade name. So don't be fooled by the trade name. Always look at that mode of action number. Tristar is acetamiprid, Altus is flupyridifluron. Earlier we say they are not the proper rotation. All right, here's a second tips, which is it is okay in your rotation program to use the same mode of action against the same generation. Okay, I'm saying that's because mutation only happens within one generation. So the chance of them having multiple, if you use the same mode of action against the same generation, meaning that you are using the same killing agents or the same stressor on the same generation. In that case, you don't have to worry about, they develop a resistance to some other product because of using just one of that. So basically, based on these particular tips, when you rotate to the next mode of action really depends on your pest generation time and the frequency of applications you want to use. For example, we know that two-spotted spider mite have 1 generation per week. So 1 week per generation. And if you plan to spray once a week, meaning that you need to rotate your pesticide or your miticide weekly, and one of the potential rotation would be that you can rotate from Sultan. 1 week later, you can follow it up with fluoromite, and then another week later, you can do Akari. That's fine. But what if in the same two-spotted mite population, you want to spray twice a week? Well, in that case, what I would do is that within the first week, I know that that's probably the same generations. I'll use Sultan twice. Sultan followed by Sultan. That's okay because it's dealing with 1 generation. The next generation or the next week, I use fluoromite and fluoromite. That's dealing with the same generations. And the third week, I use Akari and Akari dealing with the same generations. All right, what if you're dealing with a pest that have much longer duration of development? For example, citrus mealybugs, where they takes about 1 month to complete 1 generation. In this case, you were thinking, okay, well, I want to spray once every 2 weeks. And you know that within that 1 month period, you can, because it's 1 generation, you can use the same mode of action. In this case, you could probably use orthene followed by orthene, followed by the soft oil X and soft oil X, the next generations, the third generations or the third month, you can use Altus and Altus. So within the same generation, you can use the same mode of action twice. All right, so this is about a little bit more than halfway through the presentation that we have today. So I'm going to take a few breaks, a few minutes, and folks will launch the poll right now.
So just so everyone knows, the purpose of this poll is essentially to prove that you're here. So you do need to respond, even though it's a little bit silly. And we will just wait about a minute to make sure everybody has a chance to respond. If you're getting pesticide credit, you do need to respond to this poll. Just a few more seconds for anybody else who'd like to answer the poll, prove you're here, let us know which you prefer. Okay, I'm going to close that down. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everybody.
JC, before you start, I just want to remind folks that if anyone has a question, please remember to type it on the chat.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It looks like this group are a little bit more dog lover than cat lover. Huh? That's okay. I don't know who you like. For those people that don't like either one of them, maybe goldfish. I don't know. That's your preference. Okay. I like bugs. Anybody like bugs? Okay. So let me do this. Okay, let's continue. Talk about how to actually build a rotation program. My third tips for building the rotation program is what I mentioned earlier, is to include a physical mode of action or a product with a low risk of resistant development. And these would include things like horticultural oil, insecticide or soap, biopesticide, or biological control agents. So why I recommend this is because most of the time, as far as we know, that insects do not have a very good mechanism to develop a resistance for these that will kill them by very specific mode of action. For example, oil basically coat an insect and suffocate them, right? That's what we typically understand it. I would like to see an insect that could hold their breath for days after being sprayed with oil. So there's no way they can get away from suffocation. So that's a good way for you to actually use them, put into your rotation program, and make sure that you're even killing those individuals that are really tough to kill. That's a good way to do it. All right. So one of the examples that you could do, and this is the case where I mentioned earlier about citrus mealybugs, is to use one of these low-risk resistant, low-risk chemical or physical mode of action. And soft oil X, which is a horticultural oil, basically fit that profile, right? So what we know is that for mealybugs, horticultural oil actually works pretty dang good. So we put it in that rotation, and so that we can actually sort of break that cycle or break that generations in some way. All right. The fourth tips about rotating insecticide or developing a product rotation program is to start with your best product. And it is not only for the best product efficacy wise, but also best product for the life stage that you're dealing with right now. And that's particularly important for miticide. That's because insecticide and miticides are really not created equal. Some of them are more effective against eggs. Some of them are more effective against adult. Some of them are killing everything. And so that's a lot of differences. So you kind of need to understand what is the best life stage to kill with the product that you have on hand. And you can put them all together into a program somewhere. So this is just an example for some of the miticide that I want to show you. For example, chlorphenazine or Notavo. Notavo is actually a mite growth regulator. So it has efficacy on eggs and immatures, not so much on the adult. And same thing with tetrasan. Tetrasan is also a mite growth regulator, so it would influence eggs and immatures. And some of the pests, some of the miticide, for example, maggots, actually have better efficacy against immatures and adult, a little bit weaker efficacy for eggs. And for some other miticide, for example, sultan, the second row, it can kill everything. So like I said earlier, you kind of need to understand what is the most important or most effective life stage a product can kill, and use the very specific product that deal with the populations that you have. And that's very, very important for the first product that you're going to use in your rotation program. For example, for this particular example, we're finding spider mites and eggs on your cuttings that come in from somebody else. Well, what can you do? Well, one thing that you could do is to start with a product that's super effective against eggs and nymphs. And one of those would be Notavo, or you can use Hexagon and just basically spray them and use them to deal with your eggs and nymphs. And then I'm going to follow up with another product, for example, Avid or Sultan, that can wipe out the nymphs and the adult population, just so that I can be sure that the first product, if it doesn't kill all the eggs or the nymphs, whatever survive, I have a second product to clean it up in some way. What if you find the spider mite a little bit later? A lot of them are eggs, and a lot of them are adults and nymphs. Well, I probably start with a product that would deal with the nymphs and adult a lot better, right? For example, same three product, Avid, Notavo, and Sultan. What I'll ended up doing is probably put Avid first, because Avid has much stronger efficacy against nymphs and adult. And then follow up with Notavo to clean up the eggs, and use Sultan to clean up everything. Or if I find everything, then maybe I'll start with a product that deal with all the life stages. For example, Sultan, Floramite, and Savat, all three of them would deal with all different life stages of the mite. I just put them in a product, a rotation program, and have Sultan on the front to deal with all the life stages, use Floramite and Savat to clean things up. There will be one way to deal with that as well. So whatever you use, as far as the first product in your rotation is concerned, you really want to figure out what are your life stages and use the best product for that first product to use. And tips number 5 is basically very similar to what we had just talked about. So you basically use the best product that you have to start with with your rotation program, so that you can knock the population down as much as you can, and so you don't give them any chance whatsoever. Okay, so now before I move on to talking about this, if you have any questions at all, feel free to type in the chat, and then or you can ask questions later on. All right. So let me continue. So I mentioned that you want to hit everything with the best product that you have. So what is the best product? How can you find that efficacy? Well, I mean, you can talk to me, or you can talk to your local extension folks or extension specialists. And we know people, we know who to talk to, you know, or if you want to find out the information for yourself, I would recommend going to IR4. IR4 is a organizations that really do a lot of these insecticide or miticide, or basically pesticide testing for their efficacy against a lot of different insects, mites, diseases, or weeds, and all kinds of problems. And every year they produce several summaries, research summaries, put all the research data together, and in a very concise way, tell you basically how effective these products are against different pests. So you can access all these summaries for free from the IR4 website, and there's a link for that. You can just go down to that, go to the website and go to research summary. There, you'll be able to find all these summaries. For example, this one for thrips that's published in 2020. And you can look at that. What I'm saying is there's a lot of numbers. So for this particular one for the thrips is a whole 204 pages. You don't need to really read through all of it, because a lot of these summaries actually have a summary section at the end of the report that tells you the efficacy of specific product. So that's usually where I'm going to take a look. Or you can go to another website, which is the comparative efficacy and ecological toxicology, ecotoxicological database. And that's related to IR4, but you can actually go to that particular website. And here's the link. If you click on that, you can download a document that to me is actually pretty handy. So I'm going to show it to you. This is a document that you're going to download. It's actually Excel file. So what it will give you is the active ingredient, the trade name, and their use site, the IREC, the REI, and then the efficacy for different kind of pests. For example, in this case, two-spot spider mite or southern red mites and all that. Whatever data IR4 have or published data there might be is corralled in this particular document, and the efficacy are given numbers, rating, and then the average number is provided. So for example, for Mediacarp or Mesorol, apply as a foliar against two-spot spider mite, the efficacy rating is 1.3. And the range of efficacy is 1.1 to 2. So 1.3 is not that impressive. I mean, the highest number is 4, the lowest number is 0, well, actually 1. So 1.3 is not that great. Anyway, the higher the number, the more effective they are. And from here, you can actually get some of the information about what are the most effective product that you can use against particular pest species. So here's a little bit of a quick rundown as far as how effective they are. So these are some of the products as older, group 1 to group 4. Group 4 are basically the neonicotinoid. And what you can see is that aphids are not that difficult to control. You can spray a lot of stuff and kill them. For whiteflies, this particular group works pretty well. For spider mite and the thrips, not that great. Here are some more. And these are these are products from, say, these are products from group 4 to group 9. I'm basically just kind of cherry picking. This is not all of them. And most of the time, they're relatively effective against aphids and whiteflies. And again, some products works well against thrips, some products not so much. For spider mite, and most of these products are very much insecticide. so they do not have a whole lot of efficacy against bite mite. All right, here's more. Group 9 to group 21. And a lot of these products are actually mite growth regulators and also miticide. So they are quite effective against mites. But anyway, so there's a lot of information that's available, and you guys should be able to access this particular this presentation later. So you can copy it down later on. Again, there are more of them right down here. Well, good. All right, so here are more. All right, so again, tip 5, hit them hard with the best you've got. For example, thrips, if you're thinking about spraying bi-weekly, there's one rotation that I have: conserve, avid plus Telstar plus mainspring. But there's a lot of things that we've talked about how to build a rotation program, but there's some other considerations that you also need to think about. One of these considerations is, what if you practice biological control? Again, I recommend doing biological control as a way to deal with pesticide resistance, but it will require quite a bit of careful planning, because not every insecticide is compatible with biocontrol agents. So it is best for you to talk to your supplier of biocontrol agents to find out from them what is the best to use, what is compatible, and from there, build your rotation program. For example, if you're dealing with using biocontrol to control thrips, some of the products, even though they are pretty effective against thrips, you may not want to use them. For example, conserve, avid, and mainspring, they have quite a bit of mortality when you use them on, say, predatory mites. But there are products that you could use in conjunction with biocontrol to control thrips. For example, Overture, Azatin, soap, Nemesis, all these products you could actually use to combine with your biocontrol agents and do a pretty decent job. Another consideration is, if you ended up using systemic drench, remember that whatever you use to drench, you cannot use it to spray later on if it's the same crop. Okay, that would basically cause some issues later on. So for example, on whiteflies or poinsettia, folks are doing quite a bit of drench, and one of the product that folks use for drenching is mainspring. Quite a few people are doing that. But if later on, if you want to do a foliar spray to deal with hot spot, and you ended up having mainspring in that rotation program, I do not consider that as a proper rotation, because if you drench with mainspring, meaning that you already use up group 28. If you do 28 again, you're doubling up, and that's not a proper rotation program. What you want to do is really replace that mainspring with something else, for example, Altus. And the third consideration when it comes to rotating is multiple pests. I mean, in all greenhouses, especially if you're in the South and you keep your site opens all the time, all kinds of stuff will come in. You have thrips and whiteflies and spider mite, everything at the same time. And again, careful planning is very, very important, so that whatever you use for one pest, whatever product you use, or the mode of action you use for one pest on the same crop, should not be used later on against another pest on the same crop. And this is one case where tank mixing can come into handy. But again, you want to remember that whatever you tank mix, you don't end up using them later on. For example, if you're dealing with whiteflies and thrips at the same time, and you want to spray every week, you want to decide, let's just say a grower decide, okay, I heard mainspring works pretty well against thrips and whiteflies. I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to follow up with Aria, which also have efficacy for thrips and whiteflies. Well, 2 applications get rid of the whiteflies. Now I only have thrips. I'm going to follow up with Pladia to control thrips. So is that a proper rotation program? The answer is no, because mainspring is 28, Aria is 29, Pladia is a combination of 20 and 29. So if you use something earlier, you cannot use it later on, even though they are used for different pest species, if they're on the same crop, I mean. Tank mixing is another thing you need to really think about. If you use 2 mode of actions in one tank mix, you might want to take them out later on if you are going to use for the rotation program that you're going to use for the same crop. For example, if you're going to deal with thrips on phlox at this time, you start with Avid and Tarstar, followed by Mainspring, and followed by Scimiter. Remember that Tarstar and Scimiter, they are both number 3, group 3. Now, that's not a proper rotation program. So what you could do is to replace the last one, Scimitar or 3, with another product. In this case, for example, Hachi, which is group 21A. And in this case, it becomes a proper rotation program. So make sure that in a rotation program, it doesn't matter how you mix and match. You want to make sure that your mode of action numbers are different within that program. Okay, so that's all I got. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there's any.
Yeah, so it's now 12:55, and we have a few questions. Let's see here on the chat, we have a few questions. So the first one is, let's see, where's the first one? So the first one is, somebody asks you to expand on pesticide degradation. How long do pesticides last when stored properly?
All right, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, there's not very good information available. So for most of the biological product, the manufacturer will tell you pretty specifically what is the expiration date. For example, some of the biopesticide, you really want to use it within a few weeks or a few months. You don't want to, save it for a year or two after opening it. But it's a little bit trickier to figure that out for some of the conventional insecticide that's either in liquid form or the solid form. And the best source of information really is whoever produced them. But even then, they may not have the best answer. So I don't really have a very good answer to that. So what I typically do is if I get a product and if I'm storing it in a storage with good away from sunlight or good temperature, relatively cool temperature, I would keep them for a couple of years or even longer. But I'm certainly not going to keep them for more than 3 or 5 years. I try to use them up as much as I could. So again, probably a good reason to buy just the right amount of pesticide instead of, pallet full of them and end up having to store them somewhere.
Okay, great. Thanks, JC. At the end of the question here is, can you repeat rotations? How many times in a crop cycle?
All right, that's a good question as well. How many times? Let's just say you run through a rotation of 3 products. And then, your crop season is not over yet. Can you come back to it? And the answer is yes, you can just come back to it. As long as your products are, as long as you're not applying to the same pest generation. What I mean by that is that for spider mite, that's easy. If you spray once a week, that's not a problem. But if you deal with a pest that have long duration of development, for example, Japanese beetles that have 1 year, you might not want to come back like that within the same year. You want to switch to something completely different.
Thanks, great. So another question that we have here is, there's no question, but is Jessica Savage raised her hands and she has a question. Jessica, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi, so my question was, initially you had said avoid tank mixing. So then when you were giving the example of the miticides, and you were saying you could use a product that will cover all the life stages. So you mean you wouldn't want to tank mix 2 products of different modes of action that are covering different life stages of the insect, right? You would want to use one individually, one product, and then follow up with the other product.
Well, what I would recommend, well, that really depends. Well, Jessica, that really depends on what you have in your storage in some way, what is available to you.
Mhm.
If you have a product that can deal with all the different pest species or all the life stages, great, use that.
Mhm.
Then you can just use one product followed by another product, followed by another product, like a typical rotation program. But what if you don't have a product that can do all the job? You ended up having the tank mix two different things, and I think that's fine. I usually
Mm.
don't recommend tank mixing, tank mixing or insecticide, and I just see Vern has a question popping up about tank mixing fungicide and insecticide. Now, fungicide, insecticide, that's not a problem to me. As long as chemically they are compatible, I have no problem with that because they're dealing with different things and they have a different mode of action and different biochemical process that they deal with. So that's not mixing fungicide and insecticide. If they're compatible chemically, it's not a problem. But when you're mixing two insecticides together, what I would recommend is kind of do that cautiously. I don't like it. It's just my personal preference. I don't like it. But if you do want to use it, there are two cases where I think it makes sense. One of them is dealing with different life stages, dealing with two different species. In what Jessica was asking is that, well, if you have if you have a lot of life stages, can you mix two products together in a tank mix? Sure, I think that would make sense. If that's the only product that you have. So again, go back to what I'm saying is that it really depends on what you have in your storage. If you have products that can deal with everything, you can do that one at a time. I would prefer that. But if you don't have everything to cover all the life stages that you have, that would be one case where tank mixing actually makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, JC. It's now 1 o'clock, actually it's 1:01, and I know Leslie wanted us to end right on time. So should we end, Leslie?
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, all right.
Right. So I understand that there are questions. Folks still have questions? No problem. You got my email address. Go ahead and send that to me. I'll be responding to that.
Great, thank you so much, JC. And again, there are maybe 1 or 2 other people that have put down some questions. And anyone else who has a